What if the ultimate villain of NASCAR was actually the one playing us all this entire time? What if the sudden, terrifying silence echoing from the Charlotte hospital isn't a media blackout to protect a grieving family, but a carefully constructed smokescreen hiding a truth so massive it could dismantle the entire racing industry? For 24 hours, the internet has been drowning in two words: severe illness. They want you to believe a two-time Cup Series champion, a man made of pure iron and unfiltered adrenaline, just vanished from a Chevrolet simulator because of a lingering cough. But you know better, and deep down, Rowdy Nation knows better too. The official timeline has a crater in it, and nobody in the corporate suites wants to look inside. That is until Dale Earnhardt Jr. walked up to a live microphone and decided he was completely done keeping secrets for the establishment. What Jr. just leaked about Kyle Busch's final, desperate minutes on this earth changes absolutely everything. Get ready, because the narrative they sold you on FS1 is about to catch fire. We are diving straight into the dark, hidden corner of the garage that NASCAR desperately hoped you would never see. Let us strip away the corporate varnish and look at the absolute wreckage of a reputation that the establishment tried so desperately to sanitize before the body even got cold. To understand the sheer magnitude of the explosive secrets Dale Earnhardt Jr. just dumped into the public lap, you have to realize that Kyle Busch was never just a race car driver. He was the designated black hat of a billion-dollar sport, the unapologetic antagonist who thrived on your booze, and the only man with enough raw, unadulterated talent to make the corporate suits at NASCAR sweat through their custom button-downs. He was the guy who would wreck his own grandmother for a trophy and then smirk at the camera while the entire grandstand screamed for his head. For 2 decades, that villain persona was his armor, his brand, and his ultimate leverage. But when you play the villain in a theater as unforgiving as the modern entertainment industry, the knives are always spinning just outside the spotlight. The whispers in the garage did not start on that fateful Thursday in May. No, the groundwork for this massive cover-up was laid years ago, hidden beneath layers of multi-million-dollar sponsor contracts, bitter team divorces, and a burning resentment from rival owners who could not handle a driver they could not fully muzzle or control. The narrative that Kyle Busch simply suffered a tragic, sudden medical emergency while testing a simulator in Concord is an insult to anyone who has watched how high-stakes public relations actually works when an empire is cornered. They want us to focus on a tragic end, so we do not look at the toxic paper trail of a career that was systematically being suffocated by the powers that be. Look back at the absolute chaos of September 2022 when the sports world stopped spinning because a corporate giant pulled the plug on a $20 million sponsorship deal. That was the moment the trap snapped shut on the most dominant driver of the modern era. When Joe Gibbs Racing claimed they could not find a replacement for those iconic yellow and brown M&M Mars checks, the entire garage knew it was a corporate execution disguised as a budget constraint. Kyle Busch even offered to drive for pennies, to practically race for free just to keep his hands on championship-caliber equipment, but the door was slammed firmly in his face. It was a coordinated corporate exile, a systematic push to force the loudest, most rebellious voice in racing into a second-tier organization like Richard Childress Racing, a team that had spent the last 3 decades chasing the ghost of Dale Earnhardt Sr. without ever coming close to a championship. The move to the number 8 Chevrolet was painted as a legendary redemption arc, a beautifully scripted homecoming for the ultimate maverick. In reality, it was a professional death sentence wrapped in historical nostalgia. They gave him a legendary number with Earnhardt blood all over it just to distract the fans while they stripped away his competitive teeth. For 2.5 agonizing years, the all-time winningest driver in NASCAR National Series history was forced to parade it around the track in equipment that could barely manage to break into the top 20. 2 top 10s in 12 starts is not a champion experiencing a slump. Those are the depressing, manufactured numbers of a driver whose wings were intentionally clipped by an industry that wanted him compliant, quiet, and eventually gone. Yet, even while suffocating under mid-pack mediocrity in the Cup Series, Kyle Busch refused to die quietly. He did what any wounded predator does when backed into a corner. He dropped down to the Craftsman Truck Series, using his old team structure now under Spire Motorsports like a comfort blanket to remind the entire world exactly what he was capable of when the playing field was even. On Friday, May 15th at Dover, just 6 days before his world shattered, he did not just win a race. He absolutely destroyed the field, sweeping both stages and leading nearly 3/4 of the entire event before delivering a chillingly prophetic message to Fox Sports reporter Amanda Buick. When he looked directly into that lens and muttered that you never know when the last one is going to be, he was not giving a generic post-race cliché. He was sending a direct, unvarnished warning to the corporate executives watching from the air-conditioned luxury suites. That brings us directly to the bizarre, deeply unsettling sequence of events that unfolded behind closed doors at the Chevrolet racing facility in Concord on Wednesday, May 20th. The official statement from NASCAR, RCR, and the family is a masterclass in bureaucratic evasion, utilizing the vague umbrella of severe illness to close the book on a monumental tragedy. But a man does not simply transition from taking a bow on the front stretch at Dover to being an unresponsive body in a Charlotte hospital bed, without a catastrophic catalyst. The industry-standard simulator sessions are grueling, high G-force environments designed to push a driver to their physical limits, but they are also completely monitored environments where every heartbeat, every breath, and every input is logged by a team of engineers sitting behind bulletproof glass. According to an explosive internal leak that has begun circulating among top-tier team mechanics, Kyle Busch did not just quietly pass out during a routine test run. The telemetry data from that simulator session allegedly shows a sudden, violent spike in the driver's heart rate, followed by a total loss of steering control that sent the virtual car into a wall at nearly 200 miles per hour. For several agonizing minutes, the engineers on site reportedly thought it was a software glitch, a routine systems error that happens all the time during high-level testing. By the time they realized that the lack of driver input was not a technical failure, but a human one, valuable, irreversible time had already slipped away. This is exactly where the corporate damage control machine kicked into absolute overdrive to protect the multi-billion-dollar infrastructure of the sport. While emergency medical vehicles were rushing toward the Concord facility under total radio silence, senior executives from multiple race teams were already hopping onto encrypted conference calls to figure out how to frame a disaster that could spark a catastrophic investigation into driver safety protocols. They knew that if the public found out a two-time champion collapsed under their watch due to extreme physical duress that had been flagged over a week prior on a live FS1 broadcast, the liability would be astronomical. They needed a blackout, they needed it immediately, and they needed everyone to fall in line under the guise of respecting a family's grief. The immediate announcement that Austin Hill would step into the number 8 car for the Coca-Cola 600 was pushed out with terrifying, clinical efficiency. It was a calculated move to ensure that the multi-million-dollar weekend spectacle at Charlotte Motor Speedway would proceed without a single hitch or a drop in ticket sales. While a human being was fighting for his life behind the sterile white curtains of a secure hospital wing, the marketing departments were already printing tribute merchandise and scripting the exact moments of silence that would air on Sunday afternoon. The cold, mechanical reality of professional sports is that the show must always go on, even if it means stepping directly over the body of the greatest driver of his generation. But the one variable that the corporate architects failed to account for was the long memory and the fierce independence of Dale Earnhardt Jr. As the literal royalty of the sport, Jr. occupies a space where he cannot be easily blackmailed, intimidated, or bought off by corporate mandates. He spent his entire life watching how the industry manipulated his own father's legacy, and he has zero tolerance for bureaucratic smokescreens when a friend's life is on the line. When Dale Jr. caught wind of the specific details surrounding those final, frantic hours at the hospital, he realized that the official narrative of a quiet, inevitable passing from a severe illness was a complete fabrication designed to shield the sport from massive structural scrutiny. Dale Jr.'s subsequent inner circle briefing did not just poke holes in the timeline. It completely shredded the very foundation of the story we were forced to swallow. He revealed that when Kyle Busch was wheeled into that Charlotte Medical Center, the hospital was immediately locked down by private security teams that did not belong to the medical staff, but to corporate entities tied directly to the racing establishment. Doctors were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements before they even examined the patient, a protocol that is completely unheard of for a standard medical emergency involving a lingering respiratory infection. The sonata, the absolute deafening silence that followed, was not designed to give a family time to process their heartbreak. It was a desperate, high-stakes legal buffer zone created to control the flow of information until the weekend race could clear the schedule. What Junior exposed about the actual physical state of Kyle Busch during those final minutes paints a picture that is fundamentally at odds with the sanitized press releases floating around social media. This was a man who had been crying out for medical intervention 11 days prior on a hot track at Watkins Glen, begging for a specific doctor by name because his body was already redlining under the immense stress of high G-forces and internal pressure. He was ignored, patched up with a temporary shot, and sent right back out into the meat grinder because there were sponsors to please, contracts to fulfill, and points to chase. The catastrophic collapse on Wednesday was the direct, predictable result of an executive culture that treats drivers like high-performance components rather than human beings. And that is the exact truth that is currently threatening to burn the entire establishment to the ground as we transition into the terrifying reality of what comes next. The corporate containment zone did not just stop at the hospital doors. It extended all the way to the digital world, where an army of high-priced public relations managers began scrubbing the internet of any inconvenient truths. The immediate narrative was locked down tight, but you cannot delete the lived reality of the garage floor. As the news of the lockdown spread among the inner circle of mechanics and tire changers, the sheer panic from the executive suites became impossible to hide. People were being told to keep their mouths shut or risk losing their hard-earned credentials permanently. What Dale Earnhardt Jr. blew wide open next was the hidden financial warfare that had been simmering right beneath the surface of this tragedy. According to leaked memos circulating among top-tier team owners, Kyle Busch's contract with Richard Childress Racing had a hidden, highly controversial performance clause linked directly to his physical availability. If he missed a single race due to unauthorized medical issues, a massive portion of his guaranteed payout would automatically default back to the team. The corporate suits weren't just managing a health crisis on Wednesday afternoon. They were looking at a multi-million-dollar legal liability that could sink their entire financial structure for the 2026 season. This explains why the initial statement from the family felt so clinical and detached from the raw emotion of a real human tragedy. It was edited, approved, and heavily filtered by a committee of corporate attorneys before a single fan ever laid eyes on it. They needed to use the specific phrasing of severe illness because it shielded the team and the manufacturers from any accusations of negligence. If the public realized that Kyle had been pushed to test a high-intensity simulator, while his internal telemetry data was already flashing red flags, the resulting lawsuits would have reached the desk of the federal government. The leaked internal communications show a deeply disturbing sequence of events inside that Concorde simulation lab. On the morning of Wednesday, May 20th, several junior engineers reportedly raised concerns about the ambient temperature inside the simulator pod. They noted that the ventilation system was malfunctioning, creating a high-stress, suffocating environment that would mimic the extreme cabin heat of a midsummer race. But because the team was desperately behind on their setup data for Charlotte, the executive decision was made to override the warnings and tell Kyle to get in the seat anyway. When the virtual car hit the wall at 200 miles per hour, it wasn't a slow drift. It was a violent, erratic jerk that indicated a complete neurological shutdown. The anonymous reports coming from the facility technicians suggest that Kyle was left inside that overheated, unventilated capsule for nearly 10 minutes before anyone actually checked his physical status. The data screens were still running simulations, and the staff assumed he was simply resting between high-speed runs. By the time they cracked the seal on the pod, the damage done by the extreme heat and lack of oxygen was already catastrophic. While the ambulance was rushing toward the regional medical center, a secondary crisis team was assembled at the NASCAR corporate headquarters. Their job was simple but brutal. Ensure that no one connected the dots between the radio call at Watkins Glen and the disaster in Concorde. They knew the internet would immediately remember Kyle begging for Dr. Bill Heisel on live television. If the public realized a driver had explicitly stated he needed a specialist shot just 11 days prior, the narrative of a sudden, unpredictable illness would completely fall apart. To bury that connection, corporate operatives allegedly contacted several high-profile motorsport journalists, offering them exclusive future access in exchange for running heavily sanitized stories about a routine winter cold that took a sudden turn for the worse. The media complied with terrifying efficiency. Within hours of the hospital lockdown, every major sports network was running the exact same script, completely ignoring the timeline of physical neglect that led to that moment. They painted it as a tragic act of nature rather than a direct consequence of an industry that treats human beings like disposable machine parts. But the corporate cleanup crew made a massive mistake when they tried to control the reactions of the active drivers in the garage. Men like Denny Hamlin and Brad Keselowski have spent their entire lives racing alongside Kyle Busch. They know exactly how much pain a two-time champion can run through before he asks for help. When they were ordered to post generic, pre-written condolences on their social media accounts, a wave of quiet rebellion began to spread through the motorhome lot. They knew they were being used as pawns to keep the public calm while a massive cover-up was being executed. The tension reached a boiling point on Thursday morning, when a closed-door meeting was called between NASCAR executives and the team owners. The atmosphere inside that room was reportedly toxic. Several owners openly accused the sanctioning body of prioritizing the television broadcast revenue of the upcoming Coca-Cola 600 over the actual life of a legendary competitor. The arguments became so loud that security personnel had to clear the surrounding hallway to prevent track workers from overhearing the shouting match. The corporate empire was cracking under the weight of its own deception. It was during this exact window of absolute chaos that Dale Earnhardt Jr. decided to step into the line of fire. He had already seen how the sport handled major tragedies in the past, and he refused to let another driver's legacy be rewritten by an aggressive marketing department. Jr. used his extensive network of personal contacts to bypass the official channels, gathering the raw medical data directly from sources inside the hospital administration who were disgusted by the corporate interference. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The medical records allegedly indicated that Kyle's system was utterly depleted, showing signs of severe physical exhaustion that had been completely unaddressed for weeks. The lingering respiratory issue wasn't a minor cold. It was a deep-seated infection that had spread to his respiratory lining, made exponentially worse by the immense G-forces he endured during his grueling weekend double-duty schedule. He should have been grounded by a medical professional immediately after the Watkins-Glen race, but the relentless pressure of chasing points and maintaining sponsor visibility kept him behind the wheel. Furthermore, the anonymous hospital insiders revealed that a high-ranking corporate attorney attempted to gain access to the medical examiner's office before the official declaration of death was even finalized. They wanted to negotiate the specific wording of the public report, attempting to ensure that any mention of environmental factors inside the simulator lab would be entirely omitted from the public record. It was a blatant attempt to alter legal documents to protect a brand image, an act of corruption so severe that it left the attending medical staff completely horrified. The public reactions to the joint statement dropped on Thursday afternoon were a mix of profound grief and immediate suspicion. The fans of Rowdy Nation are not stupid. They noticed the clinical, almost sterile nature of the announcement. There were no details about a memorial service, no quotes from the doctors who treated him, and absolutely no explanation of what turned a healthy athlete into a statistic in less than 24 hours. The comment sections of every major racing blog became a digital battlefield, with thousands of users demanding a real investigation into the Concord facility. The corporate suits tried to counter this digital uprising by flooding the market with immediate tribute content. They rushed production on documentary packages, highlight reels, and emotional video essays designed to redirect the public's anger into a safe, marketable form of nostalgia. They wanted you to cry for the loss of a legend, so you wouldn't ask why that legend was left alone in a malfunctioning simulator pod while his heart rate was spiking to dangerous levels. It was a classic misdirection play, executed by the best public relations minds money could buy. But the momentum shifted entirely when the audio of a frantic, second 911 call from the Concord facility was leaked to an independent investigative journalist. This wasn't the sanitized tape that the mainstream networks refused to play. This was the raw, unedited audio where an unnamed staff member can be heard screaming at an executive in the background, accusing them of forcing Kyle into the simulator when he could barely stand on his own 2 feet. The tape cuts off abruptly, but the message was clear. The corporate narrative was a lie. This brings us to the edge of an absolute administrative cliff. The upcoming race weekend at Charlotte is no longer just a sporting event. It has become a high-stakes corporate tightrope walk, where a single wrong statement from a driver or a team representative could spark a massive legal avalanche. The corporate suits are terrified that a prominent driver will use their live television interview on Sunday to break formation and demand a real, independent federal inquiry into the driver wellness protocols that were completely ignored. The Sonata is finally breaking, and the cracks are showing everywhere from the boardrooms in Daytona to the race shops in Mooresville. They thought they could bury the truth under a mountain of historical achievements and emotional tributes, but they forgot that the truth has a habit of clawing its way to the surface when the stakes are this high. As the garage prepares for a weekend under total corporate surveillance, the shadow of Kyle Busch's final hours continues to grow, setting the stage for a confrontation that will change the face of American motorsports forever. The legal avalanche that the corporate executives feared is no longer a distant threat. It is happening right now behind the closed doors of federal regulatory offices. Inside sources confirm that investigators from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration have already issued a formal demand for all telemetry data, internal emails, and video surveillance from the Concord facility. The corporate legal team spent the entire night trying to block this intrusion, arguing that the data contains proprietary manufacturing secrets, but their stalling tactics are completely falling apart. This federal probe is not just looking at a mechanical failure. They are investigating a systematic pattern of human exploitation, hidden beneath the glamour of a multi-billion-dollar sport. Legal experts are already pointing out that if the environmental sensors inside that simulator pod were intentionally ignored by team engineers, the charges could easily escalate from civil negligence to corporate manslaughter. The executive suites are in a state of absolute chaos as managers realize that signing a non-disclosure agreement cannot protect them from a federal subpoena. The financial fallout from this disclosure is already threatening to destabilize the entire grid for the upcoming season. Major corporate sponsors who have built their entire brand images around family values and athlete safety are privately drafting exit strategies. Leaked emails from a primary insurance provider indicate that they are preparing to nullify their coverage for several top-tier teams, citing an unacceptable level of undisclosed physical risk imposed on the drivers. If these insurance policies are canceled, the cars cannot legally take the track, which would trigger a total shutdown of the sport. Meanwhile, the public backlash against the sanctioning body has reached a fever pitch. Protest groups are organizing digital boycotts of the upcoming Charlotte broadcast, demanding the immediate resignation of senior officials who signed off on the sanitized press releases. The corporate strategy of using tribute merchandise to distract the fans has completely backfired. Rowdy Nation is now using those exact tribute forums to share the leaked 911 audio and compile detailed timelines of the physical neglect that led to Wednesday's catastrophe. The tension inside the garage area at Charlotte Motor Speedway is so thick it is practically suffocating. Security personnel have been ordered to double their presence around the motorhome lot to prevent independent journalists from interviewing the drivers. But you cannot police the whispers of men who risk their lives every weekend. Several prominent crew chiefs have reportedly held a secret meeting outside the track, discussing the possibility of a coordinated driver strike before the green flag drops on Sunday afternoon. The replacement driver, Austin Hill, is now trapped in the middle of a moral and professional nightmare. Sources close to the team reveal that he initially refused to climb into the number 8 Chevrolet after learning about the true nature of Kyle's collapse. He was allegedly given an ultimatum by corporate lawyers: drive the car or face a lifetime ban from professional competition for breach of contract. The corporate machine does not care about psychological trauma or respect for a fallen friend. It only cares about filling the starting grid to satisfy television contracts. To make matters worse, a major technical controversy is brewing over the design of the next-gen simulator pods themselves. Independent engineers are now stepping forward to reveal that the compact, airtight design of these high-tech testing units makes them prone to rapid carbon monoxide buildup if the auxiliary ventilation systems fail. If these allegations are proven true by the federal probe, every single manufacturer using these simulators will be forced to shut down their testing facilities immediately, freezing all vehicle development for the foreseeable future. The silence from Kyle's older brother, Kurt Busch, has also taken on a deeply political significance. Mainstream media outlets keep telling you that he is simply too paralyzed by grief to speak to the public. But the truth leaking out from his inner circle paints a much more defiant picture. Kurt is reportedly working directly with an independent legal team to prepare a massive, multi-million-dollar wrongful death lawsuit against the facility operators. He is refusing to release a generic public statement because he does not want his words to be used by corporate defense attorneys to soften the blow of what is coming. The corporate suits are also dealing with a massive rebellion from local track workers and emergency medical technicians who were on the scene during the initial response. Several EMTs have reportedly given anonymous depositions stating that they were explicitly told by team representatives to delay their departure from the facility until the corporate communications team could finalize the public relations strategy. If this timeline of delayed medical transport is verified, it will completely destroy any remaining defense the corporate empire has left. This brings the entire industry to an unprecedented administrative crisis point. The board of directors for the sport's largest manufacturing partners are holding emergency digital conferences to vote on whether they should withdraw their factory backing entirely. They cannot afford to have their global automotive brands associated with a federal criminal investigation involving the covered-up death of a cultural icon. A total withdrawal of manufacturing support would instantly reduce the sport from a global phenomenon to a regional exhibition. The upcoming driver meeting on Sunday morning is being described by insiders as a potential war zone. Executives are desperately trying to script the meeting, telling drivers that any questions regarding Kyle's medical history or the Concord facility will result in heavy financial fines and immediate suspension. But with the backing of Dale Earnhardt Jr. and the growing rage of the fans, the drivers are realizing that they hold the ultimate power. Without them, there is no show, there are no commercials, and there is no billion-dollar revenue stream. The corporate narrative of severe illness is now completely dead, buried under a mountain of leaked data, federal demands, and unedited audio tapes. They tried to build a wall of silence around a human tragedy to protect a corporate brand, but they failed to realize that you cannot hide a crater the size of the Coca-Cola 600. The infrastructure of the sport is cracking under the weight of its own greed and deception, and the next 24 hours will determine whether the empire survives or burns to the ground. The Sonata has turned into a roaring chorus of demands for accountability, and no amount of corporate marketing can silence it now. The final moments of a two-time champion have become the catalyst for a structural revolution that will dismantle the old way of doing business in American motorsports. As the clock ticks down toward the most controversial race weekend in history, the garage is finally realizing that the ultimate villain wasn't the man wearing the black hat on the track, but the corporate system that operated in the shadows behind him. The corporate empire thought they could bury this truth under a mountain of slick public relations, but Rowdy Nation is refusing to stay silent. The cracks in the establishment are widening by the hour, and it is up to us to make sure the noise never stops until every single hidden file is brought into the light. What do you think really happened inside that Concord simulation facility during those 10 missing minutes? Do you believe Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s explosive revelations will finally force the corporate executives to step down? Or will the sanctioning body manage to sweep this federal investigation completely under the rug before the green flag drops on Sunday? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because your voice is the only thing the corporate suits cannot fully control or censor. Let us get the truth trending across every single platform and show the establishment exactly what happens when they try to manipulate the legacy of a two-time champion. If you want to stay ahead of the corporate media blackout and get the unfiltered, unvarnished truth about this unfolding garage warfare, make sure you hit that like button right now. Share this video with every racing fan you know, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss our next breaking investigative update.